So, for this week's reading, we looked at Anselm's Proslogion and the Summa Theologica by Thomas Aquinas. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing those. Specifically, the part where he talks about theology as a science and lays out his 5 ways for proving God's existence. Both of these were theological works, but they used philosophy to make their case. The Anselm's Proslogion was written almost like a prayer or even a meditation, and basically was saying that God, as the greatest being we can possibly conceive, must exist not only in our minds, but also in reality, like in the physical world. Whereas Aquinas takes a different approach. His style is very much systematic and scholastic, like a textbook almost. It was almost scientific, in my opinion. He argues from things we can observe in the world, like motion, cause and effect, the fact that things exist at all. And from there, he reasons back to God as the first cause or the prime mover that basically started everything. So both are wrestling with the theological and philosophical question of how can we know God exists, and they're both approaching it from 2 different ways. The main questions here that I found were theological and philosophical, as always. Basically, how do we know that God exists, and can reason support faith? Anselm's argument is very abstract. He's trying to show logically that if we think of God as like, the greatest possible being, then that being must exist. It's not just an imaginary concept. Aquinas, on the other hand, builds arguments from observations like I said, like cause and effect, how things operate in the world, and he concludes that God is the necessary being behind all of it. Both of them are basically making the case that the belief in God isn't irrational, and it can basically be supported by reason. They're just using 2 different methods to do so. From the Christian's perspective of critiquing this, the question of what do I think about this, Anselm's argument is very, very clever. I mean, it's short, elegant in a way, it makes you think, but at the same time it feels a little too neat. Just because we define God as the greatest conceivable being doesn't mean God actually exists. And so for those who do not believe, I don't see that it would be a good argument to help them understand what's going on or to help them start to believe as well. It almost felt a little surface in a way, in that the argument is assuming what it's trying to prove. It's like saying the Bible is true because it says it is. Okay, well, just because it says it is, how do we know? How do we know that whoever said it is was right in the first place? And then in Aquinas' 5 ways, it felt more relatable because they start from what we actually experience. Things like motion, cause and effects, order, just existence. Those are things that we observe and can think through as human beings, and that's where our logic comes from, unfortunately. Even as Christians, we want to believe everything through the lens of the Bible, but there are sometimes that we have to see it to believe it. I've heard that said multiple times. Things that we can observe. His reasoning is very powerful, and I mean, it does raise questions, but it also raises the big question of, even if there is a first cause or a prime mover, why does it have to be the God of Christianity, the God that we believe? Why couldn't it be some impersonable force or principle like certain people believe in the Big Bang? So both arguments are strong in showing that faith and reason can go hand in hand, but I don't think either one gets us all the way to that personal relational God that the Christians believe, that we believe. They show belief in God in rational, but not necessarily who God is. So it left me with 2 big questions this time. First, if Anselm's whole argument depends on defining God a certain way, how do we know that that definition is really the right way or the one that everybody should use? And then 2, even if Aquinas is right in that the reason points us to a first cause, how do we connect that idea to the God of faith who, loves, speaks, and relates to people? And how can we use those to share with other people the gospel?